Hey, Pretty Girl Club. Welcome back to the Pretty Privilege series on this channel. If you're new here, we talk a lot about pretty privilege, the psychology of beauty, internalized beauty standards, and this channel was created for Black women who are mixed or Black women who look mixed. So maybe you're not racially mixed as far as DNA, or maybe you've never taken a DNA test, but for whatever reason, you are benefiting from isms, colorism, texturism, or featureism, and a lot of people accuse you of benefiting from those things, or they mistake you as being mixed race. So that's who this channel is for. Be sure to subscribe and check out the rest of my content. My goal with this YouTube channel is I want to have an entire library of hundreds of videos discussing all of the nuances of the things we talk about on this channel. So every video on my YouTube channel may not be for you, but that's okay because I understand that YouTube is you're just here for entertainment and to just watch. And the point of my videos is to make you think. So if these topics are triggering for you, you should not be on this channel because this channel is not for women with inferiority complexes. It's not for women who don't have pretty privilege or don't want pretty privilege. If you don't have or want pretty privilege, you will probably be very offended by this channel. So please unsubscribe if that's you, because if you come into my channel bashing people in this community, you'll immediately be banned. So just want to make that disclaimer. But I want to talk to you guys about how I gained pretty privilege. Well, I'm going to talk about how I had pretty privilege, lost my pretty privilege, and became quote unquote average, and then how I gained it back. So if you guys watched my other story times about my childhood and my introduction to things like colorism, texturism, featureism, or just beauty in general, you guys will know that from the time I was a child, apparently I was seen as pretty because adults would often talk about my looks or whatever. That's not bragging. I'm not saying that I look better than everyone in the world. So I always had this pretty privilege or whatever. But it was so much so to the point where I did not know that it existed. I didn't know that pretty privilege was a thing because I thought that what others were calling pretty privilege, I thought that was just the normal experience of being a girl. So things like people telling you you're beautiful all the time, or people giving you free stuff, or from the time you're a child, maybe adults commenting on your beauty or giving you I don't know, a free Frisbee. I remember one time when I was a kid, this random guy, he gave me a free Frisbee. He was like, oh, I'm giving away stuff at the park. It was like this work event. He was like, I'm giving away toys to the prettiest girls in the park. And then he gave me a Frisbee. This is when I was a child. It was at this work picnic. So I thought that those types of things were just experiences of being a girl, or I thought those things were just maybe a guy being nice, or just the nature of men. I thought that men in general just kind of hold doors open, or they try to talk to girls, or they try to, I don't know, get your phone number, date you, ask you to dances or proms, or take you out to dinner and all that, maybe getting in the club for free or something. I thought those things were just normal. I thought that was a part of being a girl, and that no matter how you looked, that was a normal experience. It wasn't until I lost my pretty privilege that I realized that I had lived my whole life with this pretty privilege, and I did not know that that's what it was. So for a little bit of backstory, I used to do modeling and stuff when I was younger, from the time I was a teenager up until, I don't know, I guess my late 20s. So I lost my pretty privilege. I would say I started gradually losing it in my 20s. So I want to talk about what caused me to lose my pretty privilege. The first thing that caused me to start losing it was by not knowing that I had it. I had never heard the term pretty privilege. Other people would tell me, oh, this guy's only doing that because you're pretty. But I just thought that those girls were maybe they just thought that they were ugly or something. So I still never believed them. But I would say when I was at the peak of my pretty privilege, I noticed that anytime I've had the most pretty privilege, it's been when I'm doing the most self-care. So besides now, looking back on the last time that I had the most pretty privilege, it was when I was single. I wasn't talking to any guys. I was single and celibate because I was very devout Christian at that time. And so I had a lot of time to not only work out, but I had a lot of time to make fruit smoothies. And I used to have this hobby of creating all of these healthy meals for myself. I would cook a lot more often. I would cook from scratch and stuff because I had more time to do that. I would go on all these long walks. And those are all things that are a part of self-care, and it helped increase my pretty privilege at the time. If you want more info on that, check out the beauty series on this channel. I'm also going to be doing beauty tip videos on the member section of this channel because I don't want random spies who are not a part of the Pretty Girl Club to get access to the secret information. But I didn't realize that all of those self-care things were increasing my pretty privilege. So at that time in my life, I was still quite male-centered. So even though I had technically decentered men because I was a Christian and like staying a virgin until marriage and all that, once I graduated college and moved back to my hometown, I immediately was like, okay, I'm ready to like find a husband or whatever. And when I say find a husband, I'm not saying like chase after men, but I was focused more on wanting to get that part of my life checked off, for lack of better words. And part of this was because of my Christian upbringing. So I was around 23 years old when I met my ex-husband. And by the way, I am not blaming my ex-husband for me losing my pretty privilege. I just want to tell you the journey of how I began to lose it slowly. So I ended up meeting him. We became boyfriend and girlfriend. We were doing a lot of dates and stuff. And you know how when you're in a relationship, you might gain a little bit of happy weight because you're just kind of like eating, you're going out to eat. I wasn't spending 4 to 8 hours doing hikes anymore because that used to be one of my hobbies, was going on these super, super long hikes. I would go up these really big hills and mountains, and that's a form of working out. But I didn't really have as much time to do those 4 to 8 hour hikes every single weekend because I was hanging out with my ex at the time. And so I actually did not gain weight for about 3 years. So I started off at a size extra small or maybe an extra, extra small. And I'm 5'9", so that's extremely skinny. Like I was underweight for my height being so tall. So I remember over the course of maybe the first couple years of that relationship, I went from a size extra small to a size medium. So that's not bad, right? So I wasn't even thinking anything of it. I was just like, oh, whatever. And honestly, the fact that I didn't work out consistently for like 3 years and I still only got to a medium, that's pretty cool. There are some people who, if they don't work out for 2 months, they're going to like be obese. So I'm still grateful that I guess my metabolism was healthy and I still ate like pretty healthy usually. So I was maybe a size medium. And then I also got deeply involved in my religious beliefs. I was deeply involved in the church. So for those of you who know my backstory, you guys know that I come from multiple generations of pastors and ministers. And my dad was a pastor, and he still is actually in the ministry and stuff. You guys know that I grew up in a lot of mega churches. I grew up around kind of like the televangelist culture. So you know the people that talk about tithing and like giving money and like the rich Christians. So that's how I grew up. That was my background. And also my dad was a pastor. So I got very, very involved in the church. And by the way, I was in my early 20s, barely had any money at like 23 years old, 24 years old, and I was giving thousands of dollars to the church that I was going to. Not only that, but I actually became one of the leaders in the church. I started getting deeper into like helping people or whatever, and just dedicating all of my free time and all of my free income to this church. And so that was another thing that started my gradual decline because I no longer had a couple thousand extra dollars per month to spend on grooming myself or, I don't know, getting new hair products and all that. And then I noticed that because I was spending my extra time at the church, I no longer was doing my hair routines. So right before I moved back to my hometown, I had a very, very good hair routine because I've talked about beauty hobbies on this channel, by the way. Be sure to check out my beauty hobbies video if you haven't. So I used to have a lot of beauty hobbies, and one of them was creating my own hair products, doing deep conditioning treatments, just random stuff like that. And so, but those would take like 3 hours sometimes to try to go to the grocery store, get all the different ingredients, come home, blend everything up, and then let it sit on my hair and then wash it out. So it was a whole process, but that was one of the things I loved doing. But ever since I no longer had as much time, my hair growth, it kind of stalled. So my hair, it didn't start like really breaking off, but it still wasn't quite as healthy as it usually was. And so I remember one time I got so busy with the church, to the point where I was now kind of planning all of the really big events. So, like I said, I grew up in kind of like the mega church culture. So, a lot of the background that I have, it wasn't really like these hole in the wall churches with like 5 people. You go there for an hour and come home. No, some of the events that we were going to and all the conferences that we were going to and stuff, these are things with thousands of people. And like planning events, these events cost thousands of dollars. So I remember being so busy at one point doing so much event planning to the point where I somehow did not wash my hair, I did not brush my hair, and I didn't like redo it or anything for 2 months. I know that's very disgusting. But whatever, you guys don't know me, so who cares? So yeah, that is an example of me neglecting myself. Basically, I became so much of a servant of other people to the point where I was neglecting myself. I don't know how I ended up going that long. So basically, my hair routine was I used to straighten my hair. I used to be like one of those naturals that wears my hair kind of silky straight. So I would press it and I would let it stay pretty straight, and then I would let it kind of gradually become curly. And then, every first of the month, I would redo my whole routine for like straightening it. If you guys haven't seen that trend on YouTube, that was a trend about 10 years ago. Anyway, but I became so busy to where I just wore my hair in like a low bun and I just would kind of brush it back or maybe put it in a side braid. And before I knew it, almost 2 months had went by where I didn't do anything to my hair. I was just kind of styling it and putting some oil or something in it. And so that's an example of extreme self-neglect. And this is because I was serving God in my mind. I was serving God. I was helping, like I did a lot of helping homeless people or like helping people who were illegal immigrants and stuff, helping them to get their documentation in the US, helping people that were like doing drugs and alcohol and they had issues with that. So I was constantly busy and kind of running around to the point where I didn't really have as much time to invest in myself. But I still was like, that's not a big deal. So, long story short, I ended up getting promoted at the church. So, you know how at the church you start off as like a lay member, kind of like a person in the pews, then you become maybe some sort of leader. And then you kind of go up from there. You become maybe some sort of assistant pastor, then maybe you become a youth pastor. So, I was kind of climbing the ranks at the church. And this is because they saw how great I was doing at like serving others and helping people. And I was giving all this money and stuff. Anyway, so I was highly celebrated at that church that I went to at the time. People like loved me there or whatever. So I kind of I don't want to say I got caught up in that. I just liked doing it at the time. So I wasn't focused on myself because a part of my former religious beliefs were things like, you put God first and then like you put other people first. So I started to neglect myself. Long story short, I ended up getting married in my 20s. When I first met my ex-husband, I think he had like 2 jobs and like a couple of businesses. So he was very hardworking at the time that I met him. What a lot of people don't tell you about marriage, especially these hypergamous types of marriages, and especially these relationships where you're staying with the person for like 10 years, 20 years, you could start off in a healthy relationship. And then after a few years or like because of life circumstances, it can become unhealthy. Also, anything that a man has when you meet him, just because a guy might have money or he may have a lot of ambition or a good job or something, that's no guarantee that that guy will continue to have that. So anyway, long story short, me and my ex-husband, we ended up moving away. He didn't keep like the businesses and stuff that he had. Basically, we ended up going through harder like financial times. And so then the focus was more on both of us kind of being in this survival mode. So my beauty and pretty privilege, that was really like the last thing that I was thinking about because I was very stressed out because I was like living in this new city. I was trying to basically help make ends meet or whatever. I did not always have to work. When I was married, there was a point in time where I was more of like a housewife type of thing, or kind of like more of a stay-at-home type of wife. But it wasn't until later on. And so during the time where we were both very poor, I neglected myself even more to the point where I ended up getting sick. So I tried to Google the name of the sickness. I don't know why I can't remember what it was, but basically, it's going to be very disgusting. So it's like this thing where you end up getting almost like these ringworm type of things, like all over your body, all over your scalp, and it's like some sort of infection. And so, a combination of having that sickness and also gaining weight, like eating unhealthy and stuff, and just kind of like what we used to do was kind of eat food on the go. So, like fast food or, just drive through stuff, just takeout, or we might stop at Walmart because that was kind of the best deal at the time. So, just getting kind of these processed foods from Walmart. So, I went from a size 0 over the course of like maybe 7-ish years, 5 to 7 years, I went from size 0 to about a size 12-ish. So I consider that to be big. I would compare my biggest body type to Meg the Stallion. I'm not trying to make fun of it. I'm not saying that this is like fat, but for me, going from Chanel Iman, who is a model, going from that size to Megan the Stallion, I absolutely felt like a totally different person. My body has kind of that natural hourglass shape to where if I get fat, I just start to look very thick, kind of like a ghetto booty. So I'm not trying to throw shade at it. That just wasn't my beauty standard for myself. Also, I was married at the time. My ex-husband, he was not black. So I will say in non-black communities, they do have different standards for like body versus like in the black community. So it's funny because whenever I was around African American people or like if I was in an African American city, people would say like, "Oh, you look good. Like you're not even fat. Like you just look thick. Like it looks nice or whatever." And so I would say, depending on whatever your standards are, you may want to move to a city where your body kind of fits that standard if you care a lot about like pretty privilege and stuff. Anyway, so the first thing that happened that helped me to realize that I had lost my pretty privilege and went from being pretty privileged to just average was the way my ex-husband treated me. He did not show as much interest in me physically as he had before when I was like skinnier basically and like looking better, and also with the rashes that were all over my skin, kind of like these crusty, it looked like a very, very bad eczema breakout, except all over my face, all over my arms, on my legs, on my butt, on my whole body. So it looked really bad. So I started dressing in like long sleeves and pants and stuff. Even if it was like 90 degrees, I would dress in like these oversized jackets, like zip up jackets and hoodies and pants because I was ashamed not just of my body, but also of like the marks on my skin. And then with my ex-husband, whenever we would get in arguments or like he would get mad, he would start calling me names such as fat, ugly, bitch, stuff like that. This is something that a lot of married women will never tell you. They don't talk about the types of arguments that they have in these marriages. And my arguments were more so about money or about other stuff. But for a lot of people who are in these 20 and 30-year relationships, ask them. Ask any woman you know that's been married for decades, what was the biggest argument you've ever had with your husband? But anyway, whenever I used to get in an argument with my ex-husband, he would remind me that basically like I don't look as good as like how I used to look kind of in my earlier 20s. And to be honest, he actually was right because I had spent so many years neglecting myself, trying to serve the church, serve my husband, serve everybody. But at that time, I still felt like, no, I still look good because, I'm still the same person. I'm just a little bit bigger. Oh, and also another thing that happened. So because of the rashes and stuff on my face, I did not want to put on any makeup or anything to like inflame everything worse. So sometimes like certain lotions or primers or foundation, it would mess up my skin or it would make it worse. So I stopped wearing foundations. I remember there were days where I didn't even moisturize my skin or do any skin treatments because my skin was so sensitive and inflamed. So I was just going out in the sun. Like, I don't know why I did this, but I used to go out in the sun because you know how the sun has vitamin D, and I was kind of hoping that like maybe my melanin or something could kind of soak up some of the sun and then it would like somehow heal my skin. Side note, it kind of did. It kind of did help. But what happened was because I was going in the sun and I had no sunscreen on, my tan and stuff was uneven on my face because of like all the rashes and stuff. So what it would do is I would get a tan and then it would also make the rashes and stuff darker. It would dry out my skin, even my lips. I didn't even know it was possible for my lips to get a tan. My lips were literally like purple or like almost like this violet type of color to where it looked kind of like smoker's lips. By the way, no shade. I'm not throwing shade at anybody who has a darker, darker lips or whatever. That's totally normal, but I'm just telling you how I looked. So I didn't wear any makeup or anything. So my foundation shades that I had at home, they no longer matched me. So then I had to either not wear any makeup or foundation when I went out, or I had to try to get foundation shades that were maybe like 4 to 5 shades darker because I was trying to cover up the dark patches. Looking back, I should have just done my regular shade and then tried to color correct the patches and stuff, but I didn't have time for that because I was in survival mode. I didn't have anywhere to go because I was just a regular married woman who was kind of like stressed out about relationship stuff or like just kind of trying to survive. Also, another thing that happened was with the whole infections in my body and stuff and like all the rashes, it also affected my scalp. And so I remember just scratching the crap out of my scalp to the point where I would have patches of blood like on my scalp. Sorry if I'm being too graphic, but basically I ended up having a gigantic bald spot, like just in the middle of my head. At that time, I was not aware of like wigs. I didn't really know much about wigs. I thought that all of the wigs were like $500. So I hadn't even thought about looking into getting wigs or anything like that. So it got to a point where I had lost so much of my hair. Looking back, I think I probably had other illnesses or like, was just sick or something. Or maybe it was also stress. Like I thought it was because of stress. Looking back, it probably was because of stress to where I was like losing a lot of hair and stuff. So my hair became so thin and I could only wear it in a very high bun. It was almost in like this kind of like a rat tail type of bun. And I found an image that is like somewhat similar to how like my skin looked and everything. So I do not consider myself to have been ugly because if you look at this woman in the picture, she's actually not ugly. I think this woman is actually still pretty. But what happened was I noticed that I walked into a coffee shop one day. This is how I knew I had lost my pretty privilege because I had walked into a coffee shop, and normally before, when I would go into anywhere, a cafe, coffee shop, bar, the mall, usually people would just naturally look at me. And I thought that was just normal. I didn't know that that was pretty privilege. Having people kind of look at you, maybe stare, kind of do a double take. Sometimes you get dirty looks. People are comparing themselves to you. Sometimes a guy might hit on you or something, whatever. So I didn't know that all of that stuff was a privilege until I walked into a coffee shop and no one looked over. Or like if they did look over, it was just for a second and then they just kept doing what they were doing. No one reacted basically. I didn't get dirty looks. I didn't get like super friendly looks or like kind of like fangirling type of looks, how I used to in the past, where people would either pedestalize you or hate you. We talk about this a lot on this channel, how when you are considered the pretty girl, you get very polarizing reactions. So about half the people might pedestalize you, like if it's a man or if it's a non-jealous woman, she's going to be excited. And then if it's a jealous woman or a jealous man, they're going to treat you like trash. So I no longer had this polarizing effect. So that's how I knew. It was when I went in the coffee shop that day, I was like, oh my gosh, nobody reacted to me. And I didn't even know that I was used to people reacting to me until it stopped happening. And so I remember being in that coffee shop. Fun fact, it was actually a corner bakery. I don't know why I called it a coffee shop, but I remember being in corner bakery and I was like, is something wrong with me? Like I remember going to the bathroom and like looking in the mirror and trying to like maybe fix myself or something. And I was thinking like, oh my gosh. And basically the way that I had looked that day was I was wearing the oversized types of clothes. And I think I was wearing flip-flops that day or something. I didn't look cute. I just looked like a regular person. I looked like a regular person that you would see in a Walmart. That is the level that I had like gone to. I went from doing modeling and stuff, doing runway, doing all that, print, being in a commercial. I went from doing that to being literally a person that could blend in at Walmart. So I don't consider it to be me being ugly, but I considered myself back then to just be regular or average because people's reactions to me were just normal. So nobody stared at me. Nobody was scared or anything like, oh my gosh, look at those rashes on her face. I just looked like, a girl who's maybe a little bit thick with like some skin problems. That's it. Maybe like a little bit thin hair and kind of like a basic outfit. That's all. So I went from being constantly hyper visible to then feeling, I guess you could call it invisible or just feeling regular. Another way that I knew that I had lost my pretty privilege is because back when I was still pretty privileged and, in shape and like my hair and everything looked good, I used to get a lot of bullying. Like a lot of girls would just instantly not like me. Like from the moment they met me, I did not do anything wrong to them. They would instantly not like me. Girls would they didn't want their fiancés or boyfriends to say hi to me and stuff. So these would have been girls from maybe my hometown or girls that maybe went to college with me or they went to the same church that I went to and they followed me on Instagram. So in the past, I would like post photos or whatever, and people would, these same girls, they would like not like the photos. You know, that sort of thing where people don't like the photos. They don't like your photos, even though they're online. They're stalking all of your stories and then they're copying you. So that was an effect that I used to have when it came to social media and just in everyday life. And how I knew I had lost my pretty privilege was the same girls that used to copy me and then like hate on me basically, they stopped doing that. In fact, they became basically nice to me, and I could tell that they kind of felt sorry for me because, because I had like gained weight, because my hair was like looking bad, and because basically my skin was like looking bad or whatever. I just looked crusty. And another way that I knew that I looked really bad was because I remember I looked in the mirror that day. I knew that I looked bad. I'm not one of those girls that's like, oh my God, I'm so perfect. I look perfect 24/7. I'm not one of those girls. I know when I look good and when I look bad. I know how to objectively look at myself and be able to tell, hey, I'm overweight or my stomach is sticking out or, I have a double chin. Those were all things that I had at that time. So I remember specifically looking bad one day. And I remember one of the girls that used to be my main hater when I looked cute. She was like, yes, girl. Oh, you look so cute. And I knew, I was like, she is lying. She just wants me to stay exactly where I'm at. She likes me in this position. She likes that I am basically like looking bad, that I'm no longer quote unquote outshining her. And that was kind of the final nail in the coffin to where I was like, yeah, I have absolutely lost any form of pretty privilege I had. I apparently had pretty privilege my whole life up until this point, and now I'm just regular or like average. And it's funny that a lot of people, they'll try to call you a colorist if you are lighter skinned and you think you're pretty. So I was still light skinned, even with those marks on my body, but I never equated my beauty to my actual skin tone. So just a side note for those of you who think, oh, she thinks she's better because she's light skinned, or like this fat girl who's light skinned, she still thinks she's better than me. No, that's not the case. Not every person finds their beauty only in their skin tone. But anyway, so I knew that I had lost my pretty privilege and I went to being average or regular. So the first thing I decided actually was to clear up my skin or like really get this under control. So I remember I had to get some sort of cream or something, kind of like this antibiotic type of cream that heals rashes and stuff like that. I remember having to basically wash my hair. I was like researching different shampoos and stuff, like how to wash your hair in a way so that you don't inflame your scalp and all that. So gradually, my skin actually started to clear up. So it was still hyperpigmented from like kind of being in the sun and just not putting lotion on and stuff. You know how you can get kind of those eczema bumps and like it can leave scars. So it was still hyperpigmented, but it at least got rid of the rashes. And then I started making my own little masks and stuff. So you know how you make face masks? I would make masks and I would put it on my legs or I'd put it on my arms or like wherever all those rashes were. And then I found that there was this one wig, like it was like a half wig or something. And I wore that wig, so I covered my hair. I had not lost weight yet. So I remember I got confident enough to where I could wear sweatpants and a tank top because my arms were cleared up. So even though I was like still fat or whatever, my face was pretty clear, so I could still wear makeup. I was just wearing makeup a little bit darker though because I still had the little rashes. But my skin was generally pretty smooth. Like it wasn't noticeably bumpy or like I noticeably had these rings and stuff on my skin. It wasn't like that anymore. So the only thing that had changed was the clarity of my skin. So I just no longer had marks. And I remember I was wearing the sweatpants and a tank top, so it was showing my arms and it was like showing my neck, but not cleavage or anything. And I remember being at the gas station and some like Hispanic guys were kind of like looking, kind of staring at me or whatever. And I was thinking, what the fuck? Like, why is this guy staring at me? Oh my God. Like, is he aggressive or something? But then I realized, oh, I'm starting to get some of my pretty privilege, quote unquote, I'm starting to get some of my pretty privilege back. And I will say, I will admit, I did think about my complexion. I was thinking, okay, so the only thing that has changed about me from, last month to this month is I'm wearing a tank top which shows my arms, and my arms are clear of any marks. And so you can kind of see this tanned caramel type of skin tone. So then that I will say I did think about that, and I was like, okay, so my skin tone, obviously people do lust after that. That's a part of it, but I had never realized it because when I grew up my whole life with the same skin tone, and then when I became insecure, I was covering my entire skin tone. And the only part of my skin that was showing was my face, which had a bunch of like marks and scabs basically. And so I will say that was a time when I thought about it and I was like, okay, so my skin, that is a part of, at least the smoothness of my skin, that is a part of, it was a part of my pretty privilege apparently. You could argue that it was the tone. I will say I was tan. I was still light skinned though. I was like a caramely, kind of the beginning of caramel or starting to go towards caramel. And this was in the summertime too. And so then, and by the way, I was still fat. So then after that, I had started to go on walks and stuff, and kind of like I was still fat, but I had started to lose a little bit of weight. Like my stomach went down. I do have an hourglass shape, so thankfully my stomach always stays pretty flat, generally flat. Think of Meg the Stallion's body. So even though I was like technically thick or technically overweight according to doctors, I technically still could have worn a bikini. I was nowhere near confident enough though because I was used to being so thin. Anyway, but that was a time where I realized, okay, my skin texture and tone, that is a part of my pretty privilege. It is. And by the way, I'm not trying to say that if you have a different skin texture or tone than me, that it's not a part of your pretty privilege, because I actually believe that there are people who find whatever skin tone to be beautiful. I'm just being honest though. So anyway, I ended up losing a little bit of weight, but was still fat, but my waist was just smaller because that's usually where I lose weight first. And then I discovered synthetic wigs. That was the first time I ever discovered synthetic wigs or synthetic half wigs, whatever you want to call them. And so my hair, even though it was still pretty bald, in the front, I still had my curly hair in the front and kind of on the sides. So it was just enough to be able to cover and kind of blend in with one of those curly synthetic wigs. And that was when I discovered the curly synthetic wigs matched better with my natural hair texture and color than the human ones. The human ones, they still looked real, but it didn't stand out as much. I kind of like a more glamorous look. So anyway, I remember I was still wearing a lot of sweatsuits though. So even though my arms and stuff cleared up, I still didn't feel very confident showing my body yet because I was still like fat. Or in my opinion, I was still fat. So like around a size 12. So that was when I was still shopping at Walmart, Target, whatever. And then I noticed when I would go in the beauty section, guys used to come in the beauty section and be like, "Oh, can I talk to you?" Or like, "Can I have your number?" Or, "Hey, I just wanted to say you're beautiful." And I was married at the time, so I was like, "Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm married." But then I realized, okay, so clearly I had lost the pretty privilege and was like average. And I've noticed now that my weight is going down, basically the more my weight goes down, the more guys start to approach me or whatever. But it's funny because I actually noticed that, so when I was glowed down, I still considered myself to be glowed down at that time, but at that time I had received more cold approaches, like just out in public, versus now or versus before then. So that's how I know that like there are different levels to it, for lack of better words, or at least in my experience there were, because I felt like, okay, these guys feel confident coming up and talking to me versus before when I was very, very leveled up, kind of more of the model look. I didn't usually get just guys in Walmart and stuff coming up to talk to me. Usually I was at a point where they would be too intimidated, I guess, or, afraid of rejection or something to talk to me. And I had attracted guys in different settings. But I knew, okay, at least I have Walmart pretty privilege. But that's how I felt at the time. I was like, okay, so I'm noticing that now I tend to get attention at gas stations, Walmarts, and Targets. I don't know why. That seems to be the place where guys like to talk to girls. I don't know. But then I noticed as my weight continued to go down and as I grew my hair back. So thankfully, over the next year or two, I was able to grow my hair all the way back out down to about waist length. And then I cut it. I always do this. I grow my hair out, then I just cut it randomly because I'm just bored with it. Anyway, so I was able to grow my hair all the way back out to waist length. I ended up losing all the weight that I wanted to lose. I ended up getting a divorce from my ex-husband because of obvious reasons. And that was when I noticed that I guess you could call it pretty privilege, um, it was more so everywhere. Like it was applicable everywhere. So, for example, right when it was after the divorce and I still lived in that same city. And I remember walking on the trail, and then it was like, guys might walk up to me on the trail when I'm working out and my hair's in a ponytail, and I attracted different types of guys. So it wasn't just MLS guys and Latin American guys at Walmarts and Targets. I noticed it was still those guys too, but also, maybe like a guy on a trail. And by the way, I am not trying to classify men based on race. I can't stand when people do that because there are bad men everywhere. There are bad people in every race. But I did notice a diversity. That diversity in my pretty privilege came back. I didn't realize that that's what I had my whole life until I had lost it and then it came back. So when I was on the trail, just random guys, non-black guys, maybe they were like white guys or whatever, they might try to walk up to me with their dogs, or they might compliment me, or sometimes try to buy stuff or just ask me out, whatever. But that was when I realized that not only did pretty privilege exist, it also helped me to pinpoint exactly what was a part of my pretty privilege, or like what was helping to give me the pretty privilege, or like what features of mine attracted what types of guys. And so that's a question you can actually ask yourself, like, what types of guys do I normally attract? Because, for example, even to this day, I notice that I do attract guys who tend to be in my skin tone range. They tend to generally have my skin tone. I'm not saying that's always the case, but I do attract that. You know how some girls are like, I only attract dusty black men, or I only attract random white guys, or I only attract this. I notice that for me, I do tend to attract kind of like a multiracial black man, or maybe some sort of Latin American guy who has a similar phenotype to myself. My personal preference happens to be my own phenotype anyway, but you know how some girls are like, oh, my preference doesn't prefer me. So if you have that problem, you may want to ask yourself, like, okay, why wouldn't my preference prefer me? And if they don't prefer me, am I willing to change whatever needs to be changed so that I can attract whatever I want to attract? Because like for me personally, even though yes, it's flattering if a guy walks up to you or says you're beautiful in a Target or a Walmart, that is not the type of like pretty privilege I was personally looking for. And I'm not saying you can't, have fun or experience flirting and stuff in a Walmart if that's what you want to do. I'm not shaming you. But you get to decide, like, okay, what type of pretty privilege do I want to attain? Do I want to have more of that thick body type? Because I noticed when I had more of kind of like this thick body type, that was, it was very common for me to get talked to in grocery stores. I don't know why. I feel like maybe that's just where guys like to talk to thick girls. I don't know, in a grocery store or in like a Walmart, or a Target. And then it's so funny because once I lost a little bit more weight, then it was guys at Whole Foods. So it's like, okay, is that an upgrade or something? Like I went from Walmart and then I upgraded to like Target and then I upgraded to Whole Foods. But I will say though, okay, so when it came to the Whole Foods one, so I was not a size 12. I was maybe a size 10. I was like a size 10, so smaller than like Meg Thee Stallion. I'm trying to think of somebody with maybe a size 10 body type, maybe like a Kim Kardashian type of body. Small waist and hips, I guess, and boobs. So I remember the Whole Foods guy. So I was in the produce section at the Whole Foods, and this one MLS guy, he approached me or whatever, and he was like, oh, he was asking about the pizzas. And I was like, oh yeah, this is a good pizza. And he was like, are you an Instagram model? And then I already knew like where that conversation was going. And then I was just like, oh, I have an Instagram or whatever. And then I noticed basically after I had rejected that guy, as I was checking out, I noticed that he also went to talk to this non-black woman who was thin. So she was like very, very thin. And she was, I guess you could say white, or not quite white. She was like white and something else, but she was not black though at all. She had to be maybe white and Asian or something like that. And so the thought did cross my mind. Oh, okay. So this guy, or like my quote unquote pretty privilege level or pretty privilege experience, is similar to this woman in the Whole Foods. That's kind of how I was thinking of it at the time. Now I kind of understand the nuances of like pretty privilege and stuff like that, or the experiences that you will have with pretty privilege. That guy, I wasn't basing it on the guy. That's not what I tend to base my pretty privilege on. I tend to measure my own pretty privilege based on like where it occurs, what types of things are happening, because I believe that there are many different kinds of pretty privilege. For some women, they want to attract a man. For other women, they want free items. For some women, they want to straight up go to Hollywood or become an Instagram model or something. So you get to decide what type of pretty privilege you want. And it was really interesting as I was on my glow up journey, seeing the different manifestations of it and kind of seeing like what other girls had similar experiences to me, because that also helped me to understand kind of like where I was at, for lack of better words. And that was also when I realized, oh wait, I've lost a good amount of weight, because that girl, the very skinny one, the super super skinny one, she was actually not very much slimmer than me. She was only about 15 pounds off or something, maybe 20 pounds off at the most. And also the guy himself, he was also one of those fit, those buff guys or whatever. And by the way, I do not believe that that guy had good intentions. This is why I don't measure it based off of the guy. But anyway, I will say that at that time, I kind of was like encouraged, because I was like, oh, wow, my body is actually not far off from that other girl's. And also, I'm at least in a Whole Foods as opposed to a Walmart. So I'm not saying that that is the most accurate way to measure pretty privilege. I actually don't think there is a right or wrong way to measure pretty privilege. By the way, I'm probably going to make a video about that, measuring your pretty privilege, different ways that people do measure their pretty privilege based on their own desires, and kind of like the social climbing aspect of it. So I will say I did kind of feel like I was social climbing though, because I was like, okay, I kind of upgraded. I went from gas station to like Walmart to grocery store to like Target to now Whole Foods. Okay. And by the way, I had started off at nothing. I had started off walking into a corner bakery or walking into wherever, and then it was like nothing. And then I knew, like, okay, I've glowed down. But anyway, that is kind of like how I knew that I had glowed down and had more of a glow up, because I was starting to increase those types of experiences. So basically, the better I looked, the more opportunities and experiences I had. So then I kind of knew that I was heading back towards being pretty privileged in general once I started to have those experiences just walking down the street in the suburbs, by the way, not like in the hood, because I'm sorry, but I don't really see it as having as much of a compliment if it's like I'm just walking by a convenience store and those guys yell at me. That's not really something that I view as a compliment. I tend to view it as more of a compliment if the guy hitting on me is actually attractive, or like I'm actually attracted to that guy, or he fits more of my quote unquote type, or he fits my hobbies and lifestyle. So when I got to the point where I was being talked to and stopped like on the trails and stuff in the suburbs, that's how I knew, like, okay, yeah, now I'm heading back towards to like where I was in terms of my pretty privilege, because that's more where I would have been open to talking to someone, would have been more so on a trail, on a hiking trail, because you guys know I like hiking and walking in the city. You know how they have parks in the middle of the city, and like you can walk to a coffee shop through that park, or you can like that sort of thing. That is where I was more open to kind of receiving more of the pretty privilege and stuff. And I also noticed when my pretty privilege was coming back and increasing, because I was starting to get that reaction again from women who were like, I don't want to say they were hating, because I guess I don't know what they were thinking, but when I would walk on the trail with my little Ariana Grande ponytail and my little crop top and leggings and stuff, and I was basically in shape again, that was when I noticed that girls of all ethnicities, they were like doing double takes. They were staring at my hair. This actually happens with me very commonly, where a lot of non-black girls would stare at my hair. They're probably trying to figure out if it's real, or they're probably like just looking at it like, oh, it looks cute or whatever. So that's fine. I'm not offended by any of it. But that was when I noticed, because girls would look at me, and then also some girls would have like a negative reaction, like kind of giving a dirty look. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but yes, the women that did tend to give the dirty looks when I was on the trail in the suburbs, in the quote unquote white neighborhood, they tended to be unambiguous, monoracial, darker skinned black women. That's just my experience. And this is when I was walking in the suburbs. I was not in the hood. I was walking in a quote unquote white or non black neighborhood, where everybody walks their dogs and stuff, and like you can go on the sidewalk and stuff. There's a Trader Joe's down the street. That's where I was walking. So that was another way that I could tell that my pretty privilege was starting to come back and also get stronger, because I was receiving both the positive interactions from some men or whatever, and also people noticing me just in general, people looking back at me or kind of looking over, or they're checking out my hair, checking out my makeup, trying to see how I did it. And then also I was receiving the dirty looks again. So that was how I knew that I had like had a glow down and basically lost the pretty privilege, went to being average or like invisible, to becoming gradually more and more visible as I leveled up my looks. But what are your pretty privilege experiences? Have you ever had pretty privilege and then lost it and then regained it like how I have? Are you a person who currently has pretty privilege and maybe you want to just take it to the next level? Because usually the girls who are the most pretty privileged, whatever that means to you, usually those are girls who are naturally pretty, but they're also doing enhancements as well. So getting their teeth fixed, or I don't know, getting liposuction if they need it, or working out a lot, eating a healthy diet so they can have a six pack. But what do you ladies think? Let me know in the comment section and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.